from the National Catholic Register. This is Register Radio, bringing light and clarity to the news and topics that affect your life.
The University of Notre Dame is facing sharp criticism after the institute's chief academic officer, its provost, told faculty that hiring women and minorities is, quote, equally important to its mission of hiring Catholics. What does this mean for the famed university's Catholic identity and for the Catholic identity of higher education in general? This week on Register Radio, we're joined by Register Senior Editor Jonathan Liedl to tell us more. And then, Vice President JD Vance paid what we might describe as a very memorable visit to Europe last week and said that Scotland's government told people who live near abortion facilities that even private prayer within their own homes may violate a law that creates a buffer zone banning pro-life activities there. We're joined by Register staff writer Matthew McDonald to see if that claim is actually true. Hello, I'm Matthew Bunson, host of Register Radio and EWTN News' Vice President and Editorial Director. I'm joined in studio here in Washington, D.C. by Shannon Mullen, Editor-in-Chief of the National Catholic Register. Hey, Shannon.
Hello, Matthew.
How are you?
Wonderful.
So, as the Register reported this week, John McGreevy, Notre Dame's provost, shared a set of hiring priorities at the start of the spring semester in a faculty-wide email. In the email obtained by the Register, the provost noted the importance of hiring Catholics and other faculty deeply committed to our mission. But then he wrote that, quote, a second overlapping and equally important goal is to increase the number of women and underrepresented minorities on our faculty so that we become the diverse and inclusive intellectual community our mission urges us to be. Now, this certainly raises a host of questions and concerns for Catholics, and to help us learn more, we're joined by Register Senior Editor Jonathan Liedl. Welcome back, Jonathan.
Great to be with you both.
So is it safe to say something that we've assumed for a long time, has DEI truly arrived at Notre Dame University?
Well, although Provost McGreevy's email raises new questions, it's like DEI has been at Notre Dame for a number of years, certainly in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, when a bunch of universities and businesses and government entities circa 2020 and 2021 were implementing DEI frameworks. Notre Dame was as well. So really, in fact, there's already been DEI practices in faculty hiring at the university for a number of years. So what McGreevy is hinting at here sounds to be just like a further sort of entrenchment of that position and that conviction that promoting or increasing the number of women and racial minorities flows from, or at least he says overlaps with the Catholic mission, and he says it's equally important. So it's kind of, in a sense, it's not necessarily anything new, but it's an affirmation of how central the current administration at Notre Dame sees these priorities.
So you say that they've been doing this for a while. Some would seriously question, and questions have been raised, certainly, about the ongoing Catholic identity of Notre Dame. How would you describe the state of that right now?
I think Notre Dame's, the overall state of its Catholic identity, it really depends what we mean by Catholic in some ways. I think really a central document to look at is this strategic framework called Notre Dame 2033, which lays out a vision to make Notre Dame, as they say, the preeminent global Catholic research university. So the best research university, Catholic research university in the world. And in that document, they simultaneously say things like our Catholic commitments will guide every decision we make. But then when they define what the Catholic identity is, right, they're not saying like fidelity to the Church and its teaching, but rather they're speaking more generally about the Catholic Church as the institution that gave rise to the university system in the first place, or the Catholic Church, which is the most global, multilingual, diverse institution in the world today. So Notre Dame certainly likes to reference its Catholic commitments, but I think in many ways it leaves ambiguous what exactly that means to the university when it comes to what it's teaching in the classrooms, and even when it comes to what we're talking about right now, which is how it understands something like diversity and inclusion, which certainly can be understood from a Catholic perspective, but how it understands those as informing its hiring, right? Is it drawing deeply from the gospel to inform that, or as many people are worried, is it simply parroting what its secular peers are doing when it comes to DEI frameworks?
Jonathan, how diverse is Notre Dame right now?
Well, I don't have the numbers in front of me to tell you, but I can certainly say, I went to school there, graduated in 2011. I think Notre Dame is, the campus is sort of, increasingly diverse. There are different, racial groups represented among the students and the faculty. Notre Dame, we do know, is committed to having a pretty significant Catholic population among its student body. So as those demographics change in the U.S., right, we have more and more Latinos make up the Catholic Church in the U.S. So as some of those demographics change, that's going to be reflected on the student body as well. One professor, Laura Hollis, who teaches in the business school, and she's also an advisor to the Irish Rover, which is the independent Catholic student newspaper on campus. She saw the new priorities, or the priorities in terms of diversity hiring that the provost mentioned, as really consistent with Notre Dame's desire to sort of reflect the universal church in its makeup of not only students but also professors. If it's true that the Catholic Church is growing, especially in what we call the global South, so especially in Africa, and also in Latin America, although the church in Latin America faces a lot of challenges. If that's true, and it's also true that Notre Dame wants to sort of become the premier global Catholic university, then the argument is, well, it's the people teaching there should reflect the demographics of the church universally. So that's one argument that I've heard from someone there. It's not clear, though, that I don't know the numbers, and I don't know what the benchmarks that they mention in their hiring guidance are in terms of what they think is the threshold you need to meet for certain minority representation or for women representation. Because I do know, and I have learned since publishing the article, that some of these practices in terms of hiring are already in place, that there is a threshold, at least when selecting candidates for the long list and the short list, that you include a certain number of minorities and a certain number of women. And I can get into that, further, because that's new information that we've gotten in the past 24 hours since the story was published.
Jonathan, there's a lot in the email that is interesting, including the date, January 17th. Why is that significant? Well, because 3 days later, Donald Trump returned to the White House and promptly declared war on DEI as far as federal funding is concerned. What do we know? I know we don't have a full picture of the potential impact of Trump's policies on Notre Dame, on its federal funding, on a possible shift, in response. So what are some of the questions there for you?
Yeah, I think exactly kind of as you indicated, the president on January 21st signed an executive order that said, if you're promoting DEI on a college campus, we'll cut off federal funding to you. And I think the way the administration described it is certainly kind of open to interpretation. But, Notre Dame, even before this recent news that we covered, they established an office for DEI, a student office for DEI that was funded by PricewaterhouseCoopers, the accounting firm, interestingly enough. They have an assistant provost for academic diversity and inclusion who reviews different departments' hiring processes and ensures that they're meeting those standards. So I think that the question is, are those practices going to have to change for Notre Dame to receive federal funding? We know that Notre Dame itself is asking these questions. Why do we know that? Well, because on Monday, the same day that we published this story, the campus newspaper shared an email that had been sent out to all Notre Dame's campus from the administration saying, we have created an oversight task force to look at how new policies from the Trump administration are going to potentially impact Notre Dame in everything from hiring to athletics. So there are a lot of very open-ended questions, and the athletic things, who knows to what extent it's referring to the inclusion of people, men who identify as women, on women's sports teams, which we have no reason to believe right now that Notre Dame does. But certainly Notre Dame is taking the Trump administration's executive orders related to DEI, related to a host of things seriously, and they themselves appear to be looking into what the implications could be.
As we look at the DEI policies that are being introduced, one obvious question that emerges is what influence are those hirings, and is that overall sort of ethos for Notre Dame having on the quality of its theological programs, its legal programs, and other things that might be more directly influenced by so-called woke ideology?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the best way to, if we have any NFL fans listening right now, the way that DEI affects Notre Dame's hiring process is like the Rooney Rule. So that might not make sense to some people who don't follow professional sports, but the NFL instituted a rule a while back that says when you're hiring a head coaching candidate, you need to include a minority or a certain number of minorities among the candidates you're interviewing. So it's not demanding a final outcome. It's simply demanding that whether it's racial minorities, to transition to Notre Dame, that racial minorities and women are included in the search process. And if they're not, the assistant provost for diversity and inclusion will tell you need to include more. I've talked to some people, not quoted or anything like that, who have said that they don't know if some of these DEI policies at Notre Dame have necessarily changed the outcome of any hiring processes. But the irony of that is that the university leaned very heavily into these DEI frameworks, in 2020 and 2021, at a time when people on campus, several professors, were encouraging them instead to draw more deeply from the gospel and from Catholic social teaching in terms of formulating a response to questions related to racial justice. So the irony is that Notre Dame, even if this hasn't affected its processes too much, it's embraced DEI language in many ways and some of these DEI frameworks, and now it might very well be butting up against the Trump administration because of that.
Yeah. Well, let's pivot very quickly to the health of the Holy Father, because as we're having this conversation, this is a pre-recorded interview, how is he doing, and what does this tell us in some ways about where his pontificate is?
Yeah, well, we can say that, of course, Pope Francis, he was diagnosed at the start of this past week with double pneumonia, so a very serious condition, a polymicrobial infection of both of his lungs, presented a complex picture to the medical team. But we can say as of February 20th that the Holy See reported that there was a slight improvement in his condition, that it is described as complex but not necessarily grave at this point. We know that he's been able to do some work. He's been able to receive the Eucharist. He has had visits from people like Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy. So that's where the condition of the Holy Father is right now. But I think certainly Pope Francis is 88 years old. There is a long history of health incidences, and this, I think, for a number of reasons, is the most serious that he has faced. And he's coming up on 12 years, the 12-year anniversary of his pontificate. So I think it's certainly a moment where many of us are looking at Pope Francis and what his legacy has been up to this point in time and where things go from here.
Yeah. Well, I know that we all look forward to your continuing reporting on that story, the most important story in the church today, but also your follow-ups on the Notre Dame story. Something tells me that there's a lot more ahead, not just for Notre Dame, but for a lot of Catholic universities across the United States. Well, thanks, Jonathan.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, you're listening to Register Radio here on EWTN Radio. When we come back, we're going to take a look at JD Vance, Scotland, and the rights of pro-life protesters. Stay tuned to Register Radio here on EWTN.
Let's return to Register Radio on EWTN.
Welcome back. I'm Matthew Bunson here with Shannon Mullen, editor-in-chief of the National Catholic Register. JD Vance raised many eyebrows during his recent trip to Europe, where he warned the continent about its internal threats from a loss of religious liberty and freedom of speech. Among the concerns he raised was in Scotland, where he claimed that the Scottish government told people who live near abortion facilities that, quote, even private prayer within their own homes may violate a law. This sparked quite a bit of controversy, of course, and Register staff writer Matthew McDonald joins us to see if the claim is true. Well, Matthew, thank you for joining us.
Good to be here, Matthew.
So I guess the starting question is it true? Is it a valid claim on the part of the vice president?
It's a reach. Whoever wrote the speech stretched the facts a little because the letter doesn't mention private prayer. But defenders of Vice President JD Vance say that he got the big picture right, and I think that's true. It's clear that the governments in England and Wales and Scotland are trying to shut down any sort of pro-life activity within about 650 feet of a facility that performs abortions. And that includes things like handing out leaflets, even holding a sign, and even silent prayer.
So let's paint a little better context, too, for the listener. The levels of hostility toward the pro-life movement in Scotland and increasingly in England, I mean, it sounds pretty severe at this point, certainly under the reign of the Scottish National Party.
By American standards, free speech in Britain doesn't exist. By that, I don't mean they don't have any free speech, but the American standards that's set by the courts, and particularly the United States Supreme Court, would suggest that you can't discriminate on the basis of viewpoint, you can't discriminate on the basis of content, and that the so-called public forum, meaning sidewalk, are considered to be a place where people can exercise their free speech, and certainly in their own home or in their backyard, for instance. But in Scotland, the law that took effect this past fall says that if you are within 200 meters, which is 656 feet, so it's a long, long distance, then you're not supposed to engage in any of these activities, even if it's in your own home, even if it's in your backyard. So to take J.D. Vance's point, if somebody had a public rosary, not a public rosary, I was going to say a group rosary in their backyard, and that was within 656 feet, and it could be heard by women on their way to an abortion facility, would that be included? It's not clear that it wouldn't.
Matt, for our listeners, provide a little bit of the context. Who was Vance speaking to, and what was he speaking about?
Vance spoke on Friday, February 14th, at the Munich Security Conference in Munich, Germany. And the speech was largely about the democratic values that Americans have historically shared with Europeans. And he questioned whether a number of these values are still shared, particularly free speech, freedom of expression, to some extent freedom of religion, religious expression. He had several examples that he used where governments have cracked down on people who said or expressed things that the government didn't like. And two of those examples were in Britain. One is from England from 2022, where a physiotherapist who is a British Army veteran prayed silently near an abortion facility in Bournemouth, England. And he told the cops that he was praying for an unborn child that he and his girlfriend had aborted years before. And for that, he was arrested and convicted of violating this so-called safe space abortion facilities. Then he pivoted to this matter in Scotland. So Scotland has a separate parliament, which deals with a lot of the domestic matters in Scotland. And in the fall, a law passed by the Scottish Parliament took effect, saying that within 200 meters, we're not supposed to do anything that might influence a woman not to have an abortion.
Matt, you and Jonathan Liedl is also on the show. I think you have a great job, and I think you have an incredibly hard job, because any day you could be asked to write about a story anywhere in the world that even lightly touches on the Catholic Church, Catholic values. So many people listening to this have probably seen some of these videos where there's a confrontation between the police and somebody who's ostensibly just standing on the street corner as a report and is arrested in a very kind of matter-of-fact way. As a reporter, as you got into the story, what surprised you from what you found?
The conversation on the video between the 74-year-old woman in Glasgow, Scotland, and the two police officers would just seem totally out of place in the United States. I'm an American, and I have American values. Sure, Scotland is a different country. They have a right to their own laws and their own customs. But the gist of the conversation was, you're here advocating for something that is illegal. It's illegal for you to advocate for this thing in this particular place, which is not something that in the United States we even think about, really. I mean, we just all kind of assume free speech. But in other parts of the world, including other democratic societies, you can't assume free speech because it doesn't always exist.
Yeah, Matt, to that point, the contrast between the United States and Scotland is one that I know that you highlight in your coverage. What are the likelihoods of any sort of a movement toward a higher free speech or greater freedoms for conscience protections and other things in a place like Scotland, or for that matter, in the UK?
I don't see evidence of it at the moment. The British government website has an interesting set of facts about this new law, and one of which is they point to a poll saying that they have more than 60% support in the country. I think people generally don't like the idea of people being harassed going into a presumed healthcare facility. So that's kind of understandable if that's how people understand it. But when you get to the point of people silently praying, which is what none of these cases are, literally silently praying in a particular place, not blocking anybody, not harassing anybody, not even speaking to anybody, it's another thing. But I don't see any groundswell of support in the United Kingdom for getting rid of this. Certainly pro-life activists are up in arms about it, but it doesn't seem to be more generally.
Matt, you didn't get into this necessarily in your piece, but Vance's speech got wildly different reactions to it. On the one hand, very fierce opposition, even offense that a lot of the Europeans took to what he was saying. On the other hand, many in the United States applauded him. There was one comment asking Vance, "Can you be the emperor of Europe?" So anyway, talk about the reactions and what that tells us about the state of these issues right now across the world.
These international speeches by American statesmen are generally deadly dull, content-free, and generate no end. So if the Vice President of the United States goes and makes a speech somewhere else in the world, it's probably going to be a very nice speech and something that kind of props everybody up and doesn't ruffle a lot of feathers. But Vance's speech, from almost start to finish, he said some nice things at the beginning about his European host. The rest of it was a kind of wake-up call saying, these are the values that we've always thought we shared, but many of you don't seem to share them anymore, and you really should. So it's certainly something that they didn't want to hear, most of the people in the room, maybe all the people in the room. I would tie it actually a little bit to some of the things that the abortion supporters said in the Scottish Parliament last year in favor of this law banning open dissent. The conscience tells the mind things from time to time that the mind doesn't want to hear. And I think that was the case maybe in Germany. Certainly people in Europe, a lot of people in Europe didn't want to hear what Vance had to say.
So they recently had a law in Scotland, or they were proposing one that would also potentially bring pretty stiff fines, if I remember, regarding hate speech. J.K. Rowling made a great public spectacle of this, and they eventually walked it back. Is there any indication that there might be some turn against this law in the brief time that we have left, Matt?
Not that I know of, but to be fair, I haven't researched that extensively.
Yeah. Well, we look forward to your further reporting on this. Real quick, what are you working on right now?
Today, it's Catholic colleges that still have coronavirus vaccine requirements. There are two of them in California, and I think it would be surprising to people this far along. But I'm getting into that and describing the state of coronavirus vaccine requirements in the light of the executive order from President Donald Trump trying to get colleges and other schools to not have them.
Yeah, so this is going to be a recurring theme, I think, Shannon, in terms of Catholic identity and a lot of things happening on Catholic campuses.
Yes, and Trump executive orders. If I had 25 other reporters, we could probably cover them all, but we're doing our best to keep up.
Yeah. Well, Matt, thanks so much for joining us today, and we always look forward to your reporting and reading you in the National Catholic Register.
Thanks, Bradley. Great being with you.
Well, thanks so much for joining us this week on Register Radio. Remember, for more news, analysis, and commentary, check out the National Catholic Register online at ncregister.com. Thanks for joining us here on Register Radio. Until next week, on behalf of our producer, Michael McCall, my co-host, Shannon Mullen, and myself, Matthew Bunson, I pray that God take care of you and bless you.